Haunting Ground is a survival horror game for the PlayStation 2 that released in 2005. Actually, no, I want to redo the intro. It sounds like I'm reading a Wikipedia article. Listen, Haunting Ground is one of those really weird survival horror games that came out on the PlayStation or PlayStation 2, in this case the PS2, that's kind of niche and weird, but everyone's kind of heard about it. Think like Rule of Rose or Kuon, or to an extent Fatal Frame is still kind of niche. And these kind of video games are my jam. We played some Fatal Frames and Rule of Roses last October, and for this October, I wanted to step back into some more horror games that, you know, you hear everybody talk about, but I don't know, barely anyone's ever actually played. So, to start off this October's Scary Month streams, we started with Haunting Grounds. In Haunting Ground, we play as Fiona, a college-aged girl who winds up in a castle dungeon draped in only a bedsheet. One of the first things this game does is also show us one of the first enemies we'll come across, which is just a generic, evil-looking, weird castle monster. Think a Stuart Gordon's Castle Freak kind of vibe. One of the other things I noticed early on is the cutscenes for this game look absolutely stellar. Like, the character models and the environment is kind of a step above in these cutscenes. It looks incredible. Once we finally get to control Fiona after the cutscene, the game opens in a pretty stellar survival horror way. We're just kind of dropped in this castle area. We can kind of explore whatever we want to. There's not really a lot of direction. There's no, like, spooky scares telling us which direction to go, or camera pans to tell us which door is open or anything like that. You kind of naturally just come across the only not locked door in the area and find yourself in, like, the creepiest bedroom of all time. This bedroom has creepy dolls, creepy decor, creepy paintings, and even a creepy hot lady who gives us clothes. We also have a little flashback where Fiona starts to get a snippet of things that might have happened before she got thrown in the dungeon, but that's just a little teaser for us to think about as the game progresses. At this point, now that we're in normal clothes, the game also tells us all about the controls, well, at least the ones we can do with Fiona. We've got kicks, we've got pick up and put down, we've got crouch, we've even got this weird little backdash thing that I don't think I actually use throughout the entire game, and it's exactly as clunky as I would want a survival horror game to be from this era. We get some more freedom to explore around the castle a little bit, we get to read around in the library, learn little teasers for lore that won't mean anything to us yet, and eventually once again come across the castle freak. Hey, what do you have? Fuck. I think we should get up and run. I think we should get up and run right now. This is also where the game introduces us to the main monster mechanic of the game, which is these chase sequences. The monsters roam around, and when they spot you, you start a, well, chase. Some tense music plays, and you get to run around and try to evade them. As always, classic survival horror juking around the enemies is a solid way to do it, but these enemies chase you for quite a while. No. Get horror game juked, idiot! You're a fool! I'm the gaming grandpa! So the game also has this little mechanic called hiding spots, or evasion spots. Occasionally in these rooms there will be these evasion spots. Think under a bed, under a desk, inside a closet, pretty classic stuff like that, like how you would hide in the Outlast games. In this case, however, they're a little more scripted. So these locations you go to and press your kick button and you will go into that location. You'll be given a very specific first-person camera view, still fixed camera however, and you get to shit your pants while you watch the chaser search around the room. It's also worth noting that canonically the enemies in this game are called chasers, so it's kind of like you're RPing as a trans woman's Twitter DMs. After a while of hiding in the evasion spot, the monster will leave to another room and start his little roaming sequence again. However, if you use an evasion spot too much, the monster will start to catch on. So it just means don't get caught too often or you're gonna run out of evasion spots. But it is a pretty fun and free-form mechanic. You can run pretty much wherever you want. The evasion spots aren't the only way to get away from the monster. If you're fast enough, if you've left enough doors open, if you close doors on them at the correct time. You can actually get away just by running super far. And the game has a cool way of showing this by the music kind of dimming, getting quieter and quieter the farther away the monster is from you, which is a pretty cool little mechanic. And it lets you know if you're actually like safe to hide or if it's worth closing a door here if they're just gonna open it right away. Overall, survival horror games kind of live and die on their monster systems, and this one is tense enough that I really enjoy it. You don't really get to fight back as Fiona. You do have a kick option that you can use. However, just running around and hiding under stuff is honestly tense and fun enough that I don't mind it. But luckily, there's even more that you can do just a little later on. Stop. He's grabbing his nuts. Yeah, every castle has a pervert. After the chase sequence, we do some classic survival horror puzzles. I will say the puzzles in this game are a little esoteric and not the easiest to solve, but they're not impossible either. I think I only actually had to use a guide for one puzzle, so it is doable at the very least. We also get introduced to these golems, which will come up later, but it seems to be when you print off a little tag with their name or some other command on them, they seem to interact. In this case, the puzzle is to figure out the golem's name, which is in a book that's on the table. Not the hardest thing in the world. I was hoping that we could just name it whatever we want, so I obviously typed wiener into the thing, but unfortunately no, it's a puzzle mechanic to type the correct name in there. Well, it definitely eats it. That much I'm certain of. Okay, let's go somewhere else. We haven't solved this puzzle yet. Oh, cute butt, Emmeth. At this point, we also get access to exploring a huge portion of the castle. This is actually really cool. I like when survival horror games let us kind of see what future puzzles will be, see where future areas will be, kind of get our lay of the land early on, especially when the main mechanic is running from monsters in a quick and efficient way so that you don't trap yourself anywhere. The downside is I got lost. I got lost bad here. There is so much available of the castle, and a lot of the areas you won't realize are locked off until you're 3 or 4 rooms deep in that direction. Eventually we find ourselves in some sort of weird library or study or music room where a mysterious voice starts telling us about how he wants to turn us into something, and when we reveal the cloth that's on the chair nearby, we get a little jump scare of like a mummified woman or a corpse, and it's all very mysterious at this point. The story's a little all over the place at the beginning, but I think that's fun. You're just as confused as Fiona is, so it's kind of a neat match for what the player and the character is feeling. I also spent a lot of time in this room trying to figure out what the puzzle with the bookcase was. Said it could be knocked over, but I didn't really get it, and I spent way too long here. After exploring around enough to get a map and a key, we get another little fun cutscene with the castle freak. Aw, that's cute. Maybe not. Definitely not. The castle freak chases us all the way up some stairs until a mysterious man in a hood is able to kind of shoo him away and then tells us some lore about how we're the heir to the Belly Castle or something like that. Fiona, like some sort of scrub, doesn't have the mental fortitude to come to terms with the fact that she's been locked up in a dungeon, escaped, been chased around by some sort of castle freak, her parents are dead, and now she's inside this castle that she's never seen before, that she's the only surviving heir of. I don't actually think that's too much to take in. Skill issue on Fiona's part. While Fiona's passed out, she dreams once again of this mysterious car crash she was in, but this time we get a little more of it. And for as good as this game's cutscenes have looked, this is one of the goofiest screaming animations I've ever seen in my entire life. On our way back to our bedroom to try to get some sleep in this scary as fuck castle, we run across a poor little doggy who's been tied up to a tree. We release him, and knowing that we've done a good deed, we go to get some well-earned sleep. However, the castle freak was waiting for us in the bedroom and starts to crawl towards us, only for us to be saved by that cute little dog we saved not, I don't know, 30 seconds ago. After the little doggy shoos away the castle freak, we gain access to the best dog in video games, probably, at least one of my favorites. This new mechanic is called Huey, and he takes the shape of the cutest damn dog I've ever seen in my life. While we free roam around the map, we get to have commands of Huey. We can make him stay, we can make him go, we can make him attack the different chasers, we can make him grab items that we can't reach normally. He's incredibly helpful, really cool, and a great little addition to the chase sequence, because he can buy you a quite significant amount of time. The only downside is, if you leave Huey out on his own, attacking the enemy while you hide, the chasers have no qualms with kicking this poor puppy. It's the worst. Get out of here, Huey! You don't need to fight the castle pervert! Oh! My heart! Huey is an absolute goat, and the game even gives you a button to let Huey know that you think he's the goat, as you can praise him and pet him. It's adorable, and I love how good this mechanic is in a game from 2005. Like, these kind of pet mechanics feel very intuitive, and sure, it's clunky, but it's also a survival horror game on the PS2 from the mid-2000s. It's gonna be clunky by default. But the Huey mechanic is frankly 10 out of 10, and I love it, and it brings this game from what I thought would be really, really good if we just played as Fiona to absolutely stellar. Exploring and getting chased and running around and solving puzzles is so much more fun when you have a little dog companion that you can pet. After obtaining Huey, this gives us access to the couple of Army of Two style puzzles where one person, in this case Huey, has to sit on a button or help you do something while you can actually open the door and progress. Now this might be anecdotal, but my experience was after obtaining Huey, the castle freak gets incredibly more dangerous. He feels faster, he feels like he finds you more often, and he feels way more prone to chasing you around. Which I should probably explain the other mechanics that go into the survival part of this survival horror. Chicken jerky! Fiona has two major resources in this game. The first one is her stamina. When she runs, she will run out of stamina. If she is low on stamina, she will run slow, and the chaser will catch up faster. Exactly what you would think. These obviously can be restored with various items that you'll collect along your way, a la every video game that's ever been made in the world. The other resource meter we have to be worried about is your sanity. If you get hit by the chaser, or you are being chased too closely by the chaser, you will begin to lose sanity. If you run out of sanity, you will no longer have control of Fiona. She will blindly sprint as fast as she can to get away from the monster. However, this often involves running into walls, tumbling over things, and will more often than not get you captured, which, now that you have way too low sanity, will probably result in a death scene. Typically when the chaser grabs you, you can mash your kick button to get out of it, but if it happens too many times or you're too low on sanity, it will initiate a death sequence, and you'll have to reload to the last save. During these next few chase sequences, I also noticed just how much the castle freak likes to scratch his balls, so from now on we'll be calling him the castle pervert. As you progress around the castle doing some more puzzles, the castle pervert will have a couple scripted chase sequences. One where he knocks you off of this kind of railing balcony, then chases you around. This is significant because you have to find a way to get back to Huey. He can't jump from that far down. During this section, you also have to do some kind of weird things, like lower a bridge, which is pretty standard until the castle pervert attacks you, and you also have to find a flower to distract moths that are swarming around a door that you can't walk through because they're there. A little weirder of a puzzle, but it's surprisingly intuitive since the game likes to give you pop-ups whenever you run into one of these puzzle mechanics, and in this case it's like the moths might like the smell of flowers, and then there's one shiny object that looks like a flower out in a couple of the next areas, so it's a little straightforward. Eventually, you reunite with Huey, and at this point, you've unlocked most of the doors in the main castle area. You have basically access to this entire castle area, which means you have a ton of consumables you can get to, and especially hidden hole rooms, which are another fun little mechanic. They're like a little safe room that you can't go into if you're being chased, that hold one of the weirdest item creation mechanics I've ever seen in my life. Occasionally around the area, you will find these special little items that you can plug into this mysterious device in these hole rooms. Upon inserting a device, there you will see a weird sphere grid that kind of looks like it's out of a Final Fantasy game, and you will see that the active sphere will begin kind of rapidly switching colors. If you press the A button at the right time, you will get a specific color in that slot. However, sometimes you will get nothing if you mistime it. There are, I believe, 9 of these orbs on every single one of these attempts. Some of them are filled in by default, depending on what collectible you inserted into the device, and then it's just a free-for-all. Different color combinations in different orders make different items. There are some notes that will tell you what makes what. Sometimes you'll get something neat like a sanity improving item, sometimes you'll get like a whole equipment item. It's a little all over the place, it's super random, and it's surprisingly fun. It's really frustrating when you completely whiff on one of these collectibles, but it's also like, you don't super need them ever, like the game isn't that hard, so it's just kind of neat to get a little random gachapon machine that you can kind of put some input into. Towards the end of the castle section, we also get, however, one of the worst puzzles I've ever seen in a video game. It's not because it's hard, no, it's incredibly easy. Around the perimeter of this room, there are 4 different colored blocks with different shapes on them. Some of them will not be scattered against the wall, and you have to push them into the wall. No, the reason that it's inconvenient and it sucks is it's intentionally designed so that it will lock you out of being able to do the puzzle correctly if you do it the intuitive way. This isn't going to make any sense from how I'm describing it, but if you've played this game, you've probably done this puzzle and realized you can't complete it when you get to the final block and have to reset the entire room. Fucked up. I may have to reset this room, because there's no way for me to push this one away from the wall now. Although this puzzle is the dick. I would be so curious to see if anyone solved this on the first try. Just because it's like inherently made to fuck you up right at the end where you're like, oh wait, that doesn't work. The things with these blocks is you can't pull them. You can only push them. And one of the blocks is stuffed behind one of the far sides, which is not a problem. You move the different colored block to get it free, and then you can push that around. The problem is, if you put the other super convenient same colored block into its position, you can no longer get the other block away from the wall, because there's no way for you to get behind it and push it. All it does is punish you if you try to do it in like an intuitive way where you're like, oh, this one can just go right here. I'll push it here, and then this one, and then this one. It's not a hard puzzle, it's just, I'm sorry I'm taking so long to talk about this. It just made me super mad the first time. Eventually, we make our way to a church where we find the Saturnus key. These keys that are based off of the planets are what we use to get to the next area. They kind of show the end of a chapter, I guess. In this case, the end of a chapter also ends with a boss fight against the castle pervert himself. The game is pretty explicit about what you need to do here. There is a very precariously hanging chandelier, and the only 2 objects that seem to connect to the chandelier are little objects that when you kick them, they seem to shake a little. So the premise of this one is pretty easy. You get Huey to bite the castle pervert while he's under the chandelier, and then you can break the little chains holding the chandelier. The problem is it takes forever for you to kick them down. Now, I don't know if this is the intended way, but I had the castle pervert try to hit me, I would juke out of the way, and his punches would do way more damage to the chains than what my kicks would. Just made the fight a little faster. This fight is also one that affects the ending. So this is a game with multiple endings, and when you drop the chandelier on the castle pervert, he doesn't die. I don't know what the alternative is. I guess if you kick him to death, he dies. You don't really have weapons traditionally, but to get the ending where the castle pervert is like alive and around, you just drop the chandelier on him. It's a pretty neat little puzzle boss fight. I was a little worried how the boss fights would be in this game, if they would be inconvenient. They will be, but this one's okay. Now that we're done with the kind of fun, mysterious castle adventure with the weird guy chasing you, we go on to the rest of the game, which, fair warning, I have to put a content warning, the game's themes get pretty heavy here, as well as the death sequences. As with a lot of horror media in general, the themes explored here are pretty heavy, and as we start to learn the story in Haunting Ground, it will become pretty clear what these different enemies are trying to do and get from Fiona. There's a supernatural twist on why they want to do these things to Fiona, but it's pretty explicit what they're trying to do. The chaser for this next section is Daniela, and she is probably my favorite chaser in the entire game. Is it because she's a hot woman? That's not the only reason. It's also because she wields a shard of glass like a sword, and I think that's pretty cool. She's also incredibly polite. As the maid of this castle, she always makes sure to kind of announce herself before she enters a room, and I think that's kind of a cute little gimmick. This section of the game takes place in these very weird caverns within the castle that are honestly super fun to explore, and the change in scenery while still being grounded in kind of like a concrete castle area is varied enough that it's actually pretty interesting to run around in. We also learned that one of Daniela's weaknesses is the mirrors that we can see around the area. If you uncover a mirror and she walks by it, you blast her with gender dysphoria. I joke, but once we learn the lore, that's actually not that far off from what's actually happening. While exploring this area, we come across some really unique architecture. Mammoth heads littering the hallways, giant palm-style trees, greenhouses, graveyards. We've got a little bit of everything here, even a giant three-headed dragon that can cool a fire column. We also get a fun little twist on an enemy that I didn't talk about, but was in the first section of the game. We get these cute little blue orbs that chase you around, and if they touch you, they briefly stun you and do sanity damage. Normally these were just things to avoid, but in this section of the game, there's a fun little mechanic where if you manage to lure them all the way to a lamp, you solve a puzzle, and I think that's a cool little twist on it. The main puzzle in this section is to explore around this entire place, and using these little crossword things that you find on the walls around the area, you find the 3 special alchemical elements that you can feed to this dragon statue to feed a fire column. It is a little out there as far as puzzles go, but at least the solution of finding the alchemical elements kind of fits in with the greater lore in a way that I think is fairly interesting. Huey also goes sicko airbud mode to help you get the last element in the dragon's mouth. Something really fun about this area that plays into the greater lore of Daniela is the kind of theme of dichotomy that we see throughout this entire area. The one first place we'll see is this creepy carousel room. We see it through a mirror, which is a really fun little fixed camera angle trick that I think is neat, but if we look along the outside edges of that mirror, we can see that the room we're actually in is kind of fucked up and gory. It's just a neat little thing to show kind of 2 sides of the same room. This theming is doubled up on in one of the later puzzles where we have to kind of do a find your differences puzzle between 2 rooms on opposite sides of this hallway. In order to progress, we have to find all 3 differences within the room, and if we don't, we get attacked by the Curse of Ra. It's the Curse of Ra! Wait, what? For real? Holy shit! What do you mean? What do you mean? The reason why this theming of this area I think is so cool is because it fits into, one, the Chaser Daniela's lore, as well as the larger overarching lore. It's one of the first times we get to figure out what everyone really wants with Fiona here. In Daniela's case, she believes herself to be not human. Apparently, it's not explicit whether she is actually not human, like one of the dolls we see scattered around, or has just been brainwashed to think so, but in any case, she is incredibly envious of Fiona's ability to smell, taste, and feel pleasure and pain. Eventually, Daniela's envy overwhelms her, and she smashes her face into a mirror so hard that it shatters, and she grabs one of the shards of glass to use as a weapon to attack Fiona. Daniela appears to be most envious of Fiona's ability to bear children, which is seen in the death cutscene if you are caught by Daniela, which, content warning, I'm going to play a quick snippet of now.
I am
The fun, goofy adventure romp through a castle with our best boy Huey is well and truly gone at this point, and it's been replaced with a story significantly more terrifying for our main character. The game also really comes into its lore at this point. During the game, we had been reading mysterious notes about Azoth and alchemy and eternal life, and we finally start to get some clues as to what that really means for the people living in this castle and Fiona explicitly. Towards the middle of this section, we come across an old decrepit body holding an item that we need to progress. In an attempt to grab it, the body reacts, grabs us, and we realize that this old, decayed person is not actually dead yet. This section of the game serves as one of our first real introductions to the concept of eternal life as it's explored within Haunting Grounds. The game's overarching plot largely revolves around this idea of alchemy as being used as a way to extend one's life into immortality through various methods. I do want to note that while I will be talking about the story in broad strokes, I do not think that I have explored it enough or combed over the notes enough to make something anywhere near a lore explainer. So if you're looking for a full lore breakdown, you won't find it here, but I will try to cover key large moments as they come up, like this one here. The puzzle here is to exorcise the decrepit old man by putting out the fires in the back of the room. As to how to do this puzzle, you and Huey need to stand on different colored tiles in order to put out the fire. As far as the intended way to figure out which buttons to stand on, I have no idea. I guessed and checked until I figured it out. This section also comes with probably one of my least favorite puzzle mechanics within the game. Maybe it was just difficult for me, but there's a section where in order to get a key item, you actually have to approach and talk to Daniela during a specific screen where she's not hostile for some reason. The reason this is confusing to me is because later on, as you're doing the Find the Differences rooms, if you do speak to Daniela, she will actually attack you and get a new weapon. So it just wasn't in my wheelhouse of thought to think that, oh, I can talk to her in a different section. Just a small little gripe, but this was the one part that I had to look up a guide on. The end of this section comes in a boss fight with Daniela as she has a total mental breakdown. While the boss fight itself is a little strange given just how violent Daniela is towards you, it's actually quite fun. The boss fight involves using Huey to bite or distract Daniela while you move a series of blocks around. It's actually rather engaging and tense, and while it is simple, I think it utilizes Haunting Grounds mechanics super well. I also quite like Daniela's death scene. It turns out pushing these blocks around has created a mirror in the center of the room. Upon Daniela stepping into it, she once again is confronted with her reflection, much as she was throughout the entire section of this game if you were uncovering the mirrors to help evade the chases. She once again becomes so distraught and envious of what she is not that she unleashes a scream so loud that it shatters the window above her and a giant shard of glass impales her. I really like the way that this boss fight's ending and Daniela's death played into the mechanics that we've seen of Daniela throughout the rest of the section here. Daniela's story is also incredibly tragic. It's not her fault that she was created this way or brainwashed this way. And these negative thoughts and emotions surrounding it, as well as the lack of support of being in a castle filled with psychopaths, probably didn't help. And this eventually pushed her to incredible violence, which set her on a very literally self-destructive path. And I think how beautifully Daniela's death scene is shot kind of portrays just how tragic Daniela's character was in the end. The next section of the game involves us solving a puzzle to finally find our way out of the front door of this castle. We also get a brand new chaser in the form of Ricardo, the hooded figure that we saw earlier in cutscenes talking with the castle pervert. However, Ricardo's a rather interesting chaser. He's very fast, he's very relentless, and he has a gun. Luckily, he is just miserable at aiming. Like, he cannot hit Fiona for the life of him. So the only major difficult part is he will chase you to the ends of the earth, and you really have to hit the legs to get away from him. This area is one of my favorite areas in the game. It's rather compact, it's circular, and it has a couple different intersection points to get you to some areas faster than the others, and you can technically backtrack all the way back to Daniela's area, which you will need to help solve the puzzle. The puzzle of this section revolves around uncovering the mysteries of alchemy that have been present throughout much of the game. Around this entire area we'll find notes talking about different ways to transform substances and a little bit more lore about the eternal life stuff, things like the wet and dry method, and we have to put all these clues together in order to turn a prima materia into a white godstone. In order to create this white godstone, we need to refine the prima materia by going around to a series of different devices in the correct order that are strewn about throughout the area. The order you need to do these devices in is actually located within the clues, and it's presented in like a pretty good way where it still feels like these clues aren't, hey Fiona, we need you to do this to make the key. It's more like scientists documenting their theories and their processes, which is really cool to figure out what to do from those, and it feels really natural within the story. Now, while this section is unfortunately rather short, it is, like I mentioned, one of my favorites. It's very fun to learn the layout of the area, learn the best routes to get to each of the devices, pick up on the clues, and all while Ricardo's chasing you, which is infinitely more stressful than the other chasers due to the fact that he does have a gun and seems to chase you forever. It's a solid area. Upon leaving the front door, we finally make our way into the outside world, sort of. We're still in a mysterious, spooky forest, however. Upon exploring for just a tad, Huey runs off as he seemed to caught the scent of something in particular, and after Huey runs off, we hear a gunshot. Now, obviously, being a dog in a survival horror game doesn't really bode well for Huey, and so this is one of the more terrifying moments of the game, and I was honestly very sad that Huey might be dead. Luckily, however, this is actually one of the player choices that you can do in order to change your ending. You can actually go out into the forest and look for Huey, bandage him up, and then, well, it'll play into the game a little bit later. The forest itself is also much like the last area with Ricardo, incredibly small. Ricardo still chases you around here, but the forest is full of narrow pathways and only a handful of screens, but it's really easy to get lost. The fixed camera angles make it really confusing in which direction you're actually going, and this is just a really cool survival horror moment. I think they were able to use the fixed camera angle in a super good way to capture how disorienting being in a scary forest called the Chaos Forest would be, and so it's a fun area to just run around in, even if you run up on dead ends more than I would probably like to. Eventually you'll run into Huey, who you hear whining out in the forest, and you'll find out that he's been shot in the leg by Ricardo. Now you can bandage him up here and kind of fix his gunshot wound, but since he's been shot, he's still not good enough to accompany you, still has to rest a little, so you're on your own for the rest of this forest section. It did, however, appear that Ricardo simply shot Huey to lure you to his whines, and he begins chasing you through the forest. Eventually, you come up on a dead end with a cliff, and Ricardo reveals that he is a great alchemist, and also a clone of Fiona's father. Although that's not quite right. Fiona's father and Ricardo are both clones, using different alchemical methods, which you can learn about in the clues from the last section. At this point, Fiona faints and gets another flashback to her car crash, where she gets even more details than we had before. It turns out Ricardo was the one who caused the car crash with Fiona and her family in it, and Ricardo even went so far as to kill her father, who managed to live after the car crash. At this point, I'm going to do a little bit of a lore drop here on Ricardo's story, and content warning, Ricardo does not have good intentions with Fiona. Ricardo killed Fiona's father in order to take his Azoth. Azoth is a kind of complicated idea within the story of this game, but it's essentially an energy that is needed in order to give eternal life, or have eternal life. Ricardo and Fiona's father were both given Azoth after their cloning procedures, but Ricardo's has been failing or siphoning over the years, and he has become visibly cracking in his face and withering away. Ricardo's plan was to steal Fiona's father's Azoth, however, upon her father's death, she was the one who inherited that Azoth. In an attempt to essentially clone himself, he wants to impregnate Fiona, who will then give birth to a new clone of Ricardo. Upon capturing Fiona, Ricardo checks her to see if she is currently able to be impregnated by him. He discovers she is currently not and throws her in a cage to presumably wait until that time comes. This is where the game picks back up and we are saved by none other than Huey. I do believe this is where one of the bad endings comes into play. If you don't save Huey in the forest, he bleeds out and dies and is not able to save you from the cage that Ricardo put you in, which means Ricardo simply waits until he can impregnate Fiona, does so, and then makes a clone of himself through her pregnancy. Oh, chat room, I think this game just got really dark. Like, it was already kind of dark, but like, we don't have pants on anymore dark. The exact details of all of this are a little beyond me, who's only played through this game once at this point and didn't collect all of the notes and clues, but those are generally the broad strokes. It is, unfortunately, as I mentioned, fairly harrowing for Fiona. This section starts up with us reading a note from someone named Lorenzo, who's telling us a way to get out of Ricardo's grasp and escape the water tower that he's trapped us in. Lorenzo has actually given us a couple notes earlier in the game, but it didn't really seem like a good time to bring it up in this video because it was simply all part of the big overarching alchemical mystery. But at this point, there are only a handful of characters left, being Ricardo and Lorenzo as well. We escape the cell with the help of Huey and find Ricardo once more, and it turns out he had one other trick up his sleeve. While he was checking us, he also managed to put some sort of concoction in Fiona's eyes, which renders Ricardo invisible from her sight. This is in the gameplay as well in a very interesting way. The classic chaser music that appears when you're spotted doesn't appear with Ricardo until he's within hitting distance of you at this point. So the game becomes much, much more tense as you essentially have to guess where Ricardo could be at any given moment, and he'll pop up out of nowhere. Now, while that sounds incredibly difficult, this area is also very linear and very short. It involves us collecting a handful of strange pieces from the basement level, then running upstairs in the spiral staircase, occasionally taking the opportunity to turn a crank to change where some platforms lay, and then going up to the very, very top, where we insert those items we found to make a drawbridge appear from the lake. It's a little out there as far as mechanisms go, but it's an interesting enough puzzle for the most part. It does involve a very finicky thing where you have to place the blocks exactly where they need to be on this little diorama, which I could not figure out for a while. But once I learned you can also move the pieces up and down and not just left and right, it wasn't too bad. You just kind of press the A button as fast as you can while slowly moving the pieces around until it fits. One other puzzle we get here is a real bastard. I really don't know how else to say it. I hated this puzzle. I've been complimenting how good Huey mechanics are in this game, with him attacking, him staying, you being able to praise and pet him. But this puzzle involves you telling Huey to go from place to place, and you have to do it in a way that wasn't immediately apparent for me. Sometimes when you need Huey to go underneath things that you can't reach normally, or attack a bad guy, you press up on the right stick, which is his attack function. It turns out this is also just kind of a general Huey action function that I didn't recognize until pretty much after this puzzle was over. To explain it, you have to sit on a series of little spaces within this star chart kind of a thing, and you need to leapfrog with Huey from star to star till you get to the center. It certainly sounds simple enough, and if you know that just pressing the attack command will make Huey go to the next space, then it is super simple. However, I didn't realize that. So I was trying to, like, have Huey come and sit down on a spot, and also, like, barely shift Fiona over so she was still technically touching it, so that if Huey was on his way, I wouldn't get pushed out and have to restart the whole puzzle. And it was just a pain because I didn't understand it, and now I'm venting that all out on this YouTube video. So there, it's not a hard puzzle, I'm just dumb. The boss fight with Ricardo is also rather interesting. It's pretty easy to figure out kind of what you have to do almost immediately. There are little Huey crawl spaces that you can send him through within the tower, and he will show up in one of the windows. It is a circular arena, and so you just have to run around until Ricardo is in the area where Huey is. And then theoretically you can just command Huey to jump on him. That was what I thought, at least. I kept pressing the "come here, Huey" button, and he would just jump out of the window and not do anything. He wouldn't hurt Ricardo at all, and I could not figure out what I was doing wrong. At this point, I examined the room a little bit, thinking I was missing something, and I was. You actually have to kick out the walls of this tower, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That way when Huey attacks, he'll fall down and not just hit against the wall, sure. It's a survival horror boss fight, it's gonna be a little weird. Then, after about 20 minutes of attempting to position Ricardo just right, I realized, oh, I should probably use the attack button. And if you use the attack button, Huey does just kind of auto-lock to Ricardo if he's close enough. So once again, I didn't understand Huey mechanics. I don't think this fight is actually bad. Once again, I'm just dumb. Once we defeat Ricardo, we can make our way across the bridge we summoned earlier with the strange block puzzle and make our way to the House of Truth, where we finally come face to face with Lorenzo, the mysterious man that's been writing us notes. And we find out that he's the world's oldest man, just so old, and he slurps when he talks.
A bad apple.
And if you can believe it, Lorenzo's intentions with Fiona were also not quite good. He does reveal that he was the alchemist who created both Ugo, Fiona's father, and Ricardo, and he unfortunately had Ugo stolen away from him when he fell in love with Fiona's mother. However, now that you're here, Lorenzo wants to take your father's Azoth that got put into you when he died and have it for himself. At this point, we meet our final chaser, Lorenzo, who is, despite being wheelchair-bound, incredibly dexterous when he is chasing you. He is fast as fuck.
No! Why is he so fucking fast? What the hell?
Luckily, the puzzle for this section is quite straightforward. There's only a handful of rooms. You need to go downstairs to grab a torch, then run back upstairs to the main lobby, where if you get close enough to an area with the torch, you will trigger a cutscene where Lorenzo lunges at you and you blow up the wall with the torch because there was a box full of explosives. It's a survival horror game. It was the convenient explosives. Where did her boots go? Ricardo took them when he jailed us. Oh shit! See you later, Lorenzo, you moron! It turns out the rebel from the explosion managed to crush Lorenzo, however, He's immortal, remember? He keeps chasing us through the next section until we find our way to some sort of mining area with like a conveyor belt crusher thing and a power generator that we need to turn back on. This is actually a pretty fun little puzzle. You have to kick the power generator enough times that it turns on and it makes the conveyor belt move, and then anything that's on the conveyor belt gets, well, crushed. I, foolishly, however, thought that it would be like a, you know, any conveyor belt in a video game, where you can kind of like run against the movement of it and it wouldn't get you right away. And that way I could bait Lorenzo over to it and then kind of like move around him and he'd get sucked into the conveyor belt. But no, it turns out it's just a trigger. If anything is on the conveyor belt when it's on, you will trigger it and go straight into a cutscene, which in my case was the death cutscene first, which pretty brutal. However, second time, we did manage to kill Lorenzo. It's much better seeing him get brutally killed by the Crusher. Unfortunately, Fiona's adventure is not quite over. We find ourselves in another very mysterious section of the House of Truth, where a different Lorenzo's voice appears to be booming into our minds.
Oh, you've been very naughty, Fiona. You are causing me much grief.
A bunch of scary things start happening in various rooms, and out pops a young Lorenzo, voiced by none other than Robin Atkin Downes, one of my favorite voice actors of all time. For reference, he's Kazuhira Miller in Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5. He's the medic from Team Fortress 2. He's Travis Touchdown, which, if you haven't watched my No More Heroes video essay, he actually did a little appearance for the opening intro of that video, which, shout out Robin Atkin Downes, you seem like the coolest dude. Best Travis Touchdown came out a little bit.
What? He looks like Volcor!
Wait, he's a babe!
He's here to pound Vaj and party hard.
So as to how Lorenzo turned young, I actually wasn't entirely sure of this. I had to do what we all used to do back in the day, which was go look up 17-year-old game facts topics to try to figure out what the hell is going on. And I was able to glean that I think what is happening is that Lorenzo has a dose of Azoth, essentially, that is keeping him alive in his old form. When we rock crushered him, he died, can't really regenerate from getting squashed like that, but it turns out he made the clones, Ugo and Ricardo, in order to have kind of extra stores of Azoth. So when we killed Ricardo, Lorenzo actually stole his Azoth, and I believe that's what's regenerating him. At least according to First Gold on the Game Facts thread that I read about story questions spoilers. This is also why he was so mad when Ugo ran away to be with Fiona's mom. That was one of his doses of Azoth that just left him, and why he's so keen to get it back from you. Young Lorenzo is probably the scariest chaser we've encountered in the game thus far. He can legitimately just teleport on top of you, and it is terrifying. He also has no qualms with kicking Huey, like, right away. He's a real asshole to Huey, and it sucks. But this section you're running through is actually really fun. It's fairly linear for the first section, just kind of a simulated spiral staircase with the creepy architecture that the House of Truth has. That's actually just a lot of fun to run through, especially with the teleporting chaser. But the main puzzle comes in the form of these kind of color doors. This puzzle involves a series of rooms that will have one of two different colored doors. As you go through each different door, you'll find a kind of clue piece slash sign on the wall that will start to tell you about the order different colors should be in and how they symbolize the wet and dry method. To let you know that you're on the right track, which is to say the wrong track in Lorenzo's eyes, Lorenzo will berate you with his mind speech to let you know you're going the wrong way, so to speak. While this puzzle at first was rather confusing, it was another fairly intuitive survival horror puzzle after I gave it some thought. If there's one thing this game has done rather well, it's outside of a few key instances where I really couldn't figure it out, like talking to the chaser so she gives you an item in the one screen where she isn't hostile for some reason. It's been really, really good about giving puzzles that are fairly intuitive to figure out, and the notes and the clues and the posters, with exception of the one kind of weird word scramble one that I don't know why someone would have word scrambles on their hallway walls, but besides those couple instances, the puzzles have been really fun to figure out and solve, and not terribly frustrating. At this point, after we've solved the color door puzzle, we jump into the final battle of the game against Lorenzo himself. This boss fight is weird, really weird. I understand all of the parts for the most part. Lorenzo chases you around. If he hits you, it's bad, and it does stamina and panic damage, just like every other chaser. However, he also has a, insta-kill punch move, which hurts like hell. It insta-kills you after all. So it's just like a more difficult chaser section within one very circular area. Where this boss fight gets weird is kind of the gimmicks of it. There are steam vents around the area that will come on occasionally if you step on a pressure plate. These are also on a cooldown, so after you blow the steam out once, you have to wait a little bit for them to reset again. They also don't start blowing as soon as you step on the pressure plate. There's a little delay. So, what you can do is you can have Huey attack Lorenzo to get him to stay in one spot, then blow the steam on him. However, I don't really know what this does exactly. Another mechanic of this fight is the weird little crystals that fall from the sky occasionally when Lorenzo yells. He will yell out occasionally, and crystals will fall down, and you can kick them into the giant pool of lava in the middle, and this will rattle the screen a bit. And then you can also just kick Lorenzo yourself while Huey's attacking him. Doing all of these things in combination, I eventually won the fight. I could not tell you what I was supposed to be doing though. Initially I thought you were supposed to blow Lorenzo into the lava after kicking a crystal into it to make the lava kind of get angrier. I didn't really understand that mechanic super well, but that didn't appear to be the case either, and then I ended up killing him kind of randomly after a certain amount of time, and kicking him and having Huey attack him. He just kind of fell over and the cutscene played. It was very strange. Editor Rose here. Upon listening to this section back, I decided to go look up what the actual strategy was. It looks like I wasn't actually too far off. You do have to blow Lorenzo into the lava using the fans. I just did it really badly, apparently. Much like with Ricardo, it's kind of a finicky positioning thing. It turns out the way I managed to kill Lorenzo was when you kick the crystals into the lava, it makes kind of hot spots appear in the room, like little lava puddle things, and if you lure him into those, they deal damage, and I just dealt enough damage that way. So apparently there's lots of different ways to kill Lorenzo here. There's also one other strategy, courtesy of D Kamikaze from the GameFAQs Haunting Ground boards, who mentions that you can actually ram Lorenzo into the lava using Fiona's kind of tackle attack, which is something I've not talked about, but while running you can actually press the kick button to get like a tackling attack, but it only ever gets used explicitly for a mechanic, I think like once in the entire game, so I totally forgot it happened until right now when I was reading this, so I didn't even think about that. But yeah, apparently there's like 3 different ways you can kill Lorenzo here, which is kind of cool for a final boss in a survival horror game, that there's not like one explicit mechanic you have to make use of. With Lorenzo having fallen into the lava, he creates a huge explosion that starts to bring down the entire House of Truth, causing earthquakes that you have to crouch around. But beyond that, Lorenzo is immortal, so he starts to man on fire walk at you throughout the entire kind of escape section of this game. It's actually pretty tense. Fire Lorenzo is not a very terrifying chaser, he's rather slow. But what makes this section intense is the earthquakes that happen, and that if you don't crouch down, you'll actually stumble a bit. And then there's like one little QTE pillar section thing, which I died on once because I didn't figure out what exactly I was supposed to do, and then the second time I just mashed a lot and I got through it. And after that chase sequence, we can finally open the door of more alchemy symbolism, and we finally beat the game. At this point we can get a handful of endings. If we saved the castle pervert by dropping the chandelier on him instead of kicking and Hueying him to death, he will appear in the castle just kind of gardening and minding his own business. If we're good relationship with Huey, we also get Huey to join us as we leave the castle, which is pretty cool. Outside of the really bad ending, the endings don't seem to be too different. You just kind of get away and then you have Huey or you don't, but it's cool nonetheless that there's even an option for multiple endings like that depending on how much you pet your dog. Upon beating the game, we also get a handful of different extras. We get a bunch of costumes for Fiona of various sexualization that, while they are, I think, incredibly well-designed outfits and Fiona looks good, is a little weird in a game where most of the time the enemies are trying to sexually assault you. We also get access to a fun little minigame where we get to play as Huey instead of Fiona. And also, one of my favorite things, and other survival horror games like Resident Evil do this too, but they give you little character models to look at, which I always think is a lot of fun. There's concept art and character models, which is really, really cool. You can actually see in the concept art how a lot of this game probably changed over development. Notably in the concept art, Fiona looks much younger, but she's explicitly college-aged in the actual game that we play, which I think makes the entire plot a little more palatable. A bunch of the areas of the castle and the mansion seem to have changed quite a bit from the concept art as well, which I don't think I could say I prefer one over the other, but it's always really cool seeing concept art like this and seeing how these kind of initial designs transform into what we actually get to play. Now, as for the game itself, I thought this game was stellar. It was one of the most unique survival horror games I've ever played. The Huey mechanics, outside of me not understanding them for a handful of puzzles, were super intuitive, and especially for a game from this era, to have companion mechanics like this is really, really awesome. The hide-and-seek mechanic with the enemies and the chasers was also really cool. I enjoyed it quite a lot. It felt tense getting chased around, and having all the different weird music play to differentiate the different chasers in the different areas was also just a really neat touch. It added to the hecticness and the tension of everything in a really cool way, so that when you do finally find a hiding spot, it feels relieving. The story itself I also rather enjoyed. There is a ton of lore within the clues and the notes that we find, but a ton of it is given to us fairly early on. And it makes sense in such a way that we are in this mansion. We aren't progressing through a game, we're in a mansion or a castle where people lived and their notes are strewn about, whether we understand what they're talking about or not. And I think the game lays out the mystery as the game progresses super duper well. It's not always explicitly clear and there's a lot of inferences that have to be made, but it's a horror game. That's kind of how these things go. I also really loved the overarching setting of alchemy. It's always an interesting concept, I think, especially in something like survival horror. We see things of alchemy in the form of like monsters or eternal life pretty often, and I think Haunting Ground did it in a really interesting way, especially tying our character into the story with this concept of Azoth, which is the resource they need to extend their eternal life. I also think the themes this game explored were done quite well and quite respectfully, especially given how heavy the actual content and things Fiona goes through are. It really does feel like Fiona is trapped in this awful, terrible place with these horrible people that selfishly wish to do her harm purely for their own gains. And in incredibly terrible ways as well. It feels hellish. And the idea of having Huey, this companion with you, your only form of companionship to help guide you and be with you through this entire terrible ordeal, is really fascinating, and I think they did it in a really interesting way. Overall, Haunting Ground is, as far as I'm concerned, a survival horror classic. It's exceptionally well done, and it was made in this era where I feel like game developers were trying a lot of things, and sometimes they didn't work. In the case of Obscure, a game I'm making a video on next because we also streamed it, and sometimes it works really well, like in this case, where you get a really interesting, unique mechanic within a survival horror universe that does feel bleak and twisted and demented. It comes together really, really well in a way that I enjoyed. It's far from perfect. It is definitely a mid-2000s game with a little bit of jank, but overall the story is well made, the graphics are amazing, the mechanics are fun and interesting, the enemies in the survival horror game feel like a fresh take on this kind of chasing enemy that I really enjoy. Overall, it's really, really great, and while I did spoil a lot of the game and the key plot points, I highly recommend you playing this because it is a super unique experience. Alright, that's the end of the video. It lasted way longer than I wanted it to. This is supposed to be like a 15-minute video, and I just kept talking about this GD game because I ended up liking it a lot. But anyway, it was October. We streamed a lot of games over on my twitch.tv. Now I gotta do the classic YouTuber plug. Like the video, subscribe the video, ring the damn bell like Dark Souls.